indicate today's shir is for his refuah shlema.
Good.
Okay. All right, our sponsors for learning. A Year of Learning, Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith. Yehuda ben Yisrael, in memory of Malcolm Mann, our former member, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Arav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva. Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel Pinchas ben Harav Shimon. Sharon and Fred Lisker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edelbas Yaakov. Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Siddell, and Irving and Pearl Kaplan. Friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler, China Bas Yeshaya. Friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov. Friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef. Friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim, and the many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi. As a month of learning, we have the following: B. Pizer, in memory of her father, Yischa Dov ben Shmuel, Mordechai and Miriam Burr, in memory of his mother, Manya Bas Harav Shimon Halevi. Cheryl Sher, in honor of those who joined her first series of epistemology of tefillah classes. As a week of learning, we have Michael and Judith Paretsky, in memory of mother Rachel Bas Avram, Jack Gilman, in memory of his brother Zev Yosef ben Yitzchak, Sharon and Michael Glass, in memory of her mother Chaya bat Avram Baruch, Susan and Ron Podolsky, in memory of her mother Chaya Bas Avraham Dov. Yesterday was the 13th. We took care of that yesterday, as well as that, and that then is the conclusion for today. May the Neshamas have an aliyah, Yati Yashir Shem Atliya, and the Chol B'nai Israel a good gebenched yar. An administrative item to touch on. Tomorrow morning, there is only one davening at 8 o'clock. And when I spoke to the rabbi, he said it wasn't going to conclude till about 5 after 9. Does anyone have suggestions as to when we should structure the Daf Yomi on Zoom tomorrow morning? I don't see any. Hey, I will throw out someone suggested.
Let's make it 9:30.
Well, that Deb was the only one that was in the Chumash class at 9:30, so we could do it then.
Or 9:15. 9:15.
9:15. How does that sound? 9:15. All right, 9:15. I see. Is that better than 7 o'clock in the morning?
7 o'clock is.
I don't know. I don't know how everybody's going to fit into 1 million. So I think you got to get to shul early tomorrow.
Yeah.
See.
Well, that's a separate issue, right? Erwin, you're right, but that.
Oh, no one's going to take your seat up front. Trust me.
One of the women will. They don't. Did he count on women coming to this tomorrow morning?
No, very few. Very few come that morning.
No.
Anyway,
You're lucky you get 3 or 4.
All right, 9:15 going once.
Sound like that little like water.
9:15 going twice.
9:15.
9:15 it is. Okay. All right. Very good, gentlemen. Okay.
We'll push it back another day.
Today we are picking up on Gimel Amud Aleph.
Thank you.
Okay. we went through the mnemonic device of Pazar Kashav, right? We said quickly, that was the lottery, the blessing of Zman, Shechianu, that some consider the Shmini Atzeret a separate regel, separate holiday. The offerings did not parallel that of Sukkot. In other words, it did not add the way they did in the normal Sukkot manner.
Right.
Okay, there was a different shear, a different psalm, and an additional blessing was added in Birkat and Amida. So that's where we paused for a moment, and then simply saw that the Gemara picked up on the phrase aval le'inyan tashlumin, but in terms of any kind of substitution, okay, in other words, making up for what might have missed in terms of an offering for one of the days of Sukkot, particularly the first day, tashlumin derishon hu, that it's acceptable to do that chagiga, that festival offering, okay, to make it up on Shmini Atzeret if it was missed on the first day, okay? So Hahu Titnan is where we're starting on Gimel, okay, second line, Gimel Amud Aleph, okay, as it was taught, okay? The following, right? Mi shelo chag b'yom tov harishon shel chag chogeg v'holech kol haregel kulo. But, says the Gemara, we have a reference to Shmini Atzeret with the following, okay? Right? Maybe we could say that using that as the example to parallel separation, segregation, sequestering of the Kohen, okay, that we see on Yom Kippur, maybe that can be paralleled by the example of Shmini Atzeret still. V'yom Tov, right? Maybe that's the point. V'yom Tov ha'acharon shel Chag. Okay? Right? So the point, however, is that nevertheless, that doesn't seem to apply. Okay. Our attempt now, still with Atzeret, Ve'ema, and I might say, therefore, Atzeret the Prishat Shiva Liyom Echad Hu. Can we say then that regarding Shmini Atzeret, that sequestering for 7 days prior to it is appropriate for one day? Amar Rab Abba. Rab Abba explains that's not the case. Danin par echad va'ayil echad, mi par echad va'ayil echad. That we draw the conclusion, we make the parallel, okay? Based on the idea that there is one par, one example of an ox, and one example, okay, of a ram, all right, from another example of the same equivalent korbanot, right? The ram, okay? La'afuke, to exclude the example with Atzeret, the Shnei Elim Minhu, right? Because that has on its offerings two rams, and therefore that's not a valid parallel. The Gemara says, Hanechelaman Amar Yom HaKippurim Ail Echad Hu. That argument, okay, that implies there's no parallel is acceptable, okay, for those who hold that on Yom Kippur we only have the one ram offering. Ela laman da'amar shnei elim minhu. But according to one who might hold that on Yom Kippur there are two ram offerings, what then are you going to say? Tanya, because we have taught in another Braita the following. Rebbe Omer, according to the view of Rebbe, okay, when the Pasuk cites an example here in Vayikra, it says basically, Ail echad hu ha'amor kan, hu ha'amor b'chomesh ha'pikudim, that elsewhere in a Bamidbar, where it also makes reference, okay, to a pasuk, right? That then tells us in that pasuk, okay, that also refers to an offering on Yom Kippur, that they're both referring really to the same one ram offering. But there's a challenge to Rebbe's statement by Rebbe Eliezer, but Rebbe Shimon, who says as follows: Shnei elim him. Know that there you need two rams on Yom Kippur, one based on the pasuk in Vayikra, and one based on the pasuk in Bamidbar. Echad ha'amur kan, one said here in the pasuk of Vayikra, as I said, ve'echad ha'amur b'chomash ha'pikudim, and one referred to in the verse, in the pasuk, okay, of Bamidbar. Okay. Now, Art Scroll should cite those psukim, Vayikra 23:18 and Bamidbar 29:8. Okay, right. So what happens? Afilu tema, you might say, says the Gemara, maybe even according to the view of Rebbe Eliezer Rebbe Shimon, who says that there are two different psukim, thus requiring two ram offerings. Okay. What happens? Hatam, there in regards to Yom Kippur, chad lechovat hayom, v'chad lemusafin. That one is for the obligation of the day, the other being for as an additional offering for the Yom Tov. Okay. La'afuke atzeret, which still means that attempting the parallel of sequestering between Yom Kippur and Shmini Atzeret doesn't work. Why? Because la'afuke atzeret, the travaihu chovat hayom ninhu. Because Rabbi Eliezer could be challenged and saying, no, even though you have two items, two ram offerings on that day, both of them come as obligations for the day and not one for the day and one for another purpose. Fine, says the Gemara. Let's try to make another attempt at finding a parallel to the sequestering regarding Yom Kippur, and we'll throw out the idea of Rosh Hashanah, Ve'ema Rosh Hashanah. Maybe I might suggest that the parallel could be there. Why? The Prishat Shiva Liyom Echadhu. Because I could say that before Rosh Hashanah, you have a number of days that you could sequester the Kohen before then. Amar Rabbi Abahu, says Rabbi Abahu as a challenge to that suggestion. Danin par va'ayel shelo mi par va'ayel shelo. No, he says, because we have to draw the judgment, the parallel, from the fact that the ox and the ram belong to a him, namely, they're the property of the Kohen Gadol. From another example where we bring the offerings from his, namely the Kohen Gadol's personal property, la'afuke atzeret, to exclude the example of atzeret, Shmini Atzeret, v'Rosh Hashanah, and the Rosh Hashanah, the tzibur ninhu, because those offerings come from the community funds. Okay. Now the Gemara answers, Hanech leman da'amar, that's acceptable, okay, for the one who holds that when you read the pasuk and it says kach lecha, okay, that you shall take mishelcha, it becomes from yours, your personal property, implying the Kohen Gadol. And the pasuk that says then va'aseh lecha, and it says, and you shall do mishelcha, that also that comes from your own means, your own property. Ela laman da'amar mishel tzibur. But according to the one who says that you have to take it from the community, ma'ika lamema, what are you going to say then? The Tanya, because we have a braita that teaches as follows. Kach lecha, when it says you take you, mi shelcha, it is from your own means, your own property. Va'aseh lecha, and if when it says make you, or you shall make, mi shelcha, again from your own. Right? But when the pasuk reads vayikhu elecha, and they will take for you, mishal tzibor, that means it comes from the community. Divrei Rabbi Yoshaya. That's the view of Rabbi Yoshaya. Rabbi Yonatan, Omer. But Rabbi Yonatan, however, excuse me, will challenge that and tell us as follows. Omer bein kach lecha, bein vayikhu elecha, mishal tzibur. Regardless of the language of the pasuk, okay, it refers those examples to taking from the community. In other words, using communal funds to pay for the offering. Umat Talmud lomar kach lecha. So why the difference in language between various psukim? If it says you take you, kivyachol mishelcha ani rotzeh yoter mishelahem, to inform you that it's as if Hashem is more desirous of that which comes from you than what comes from them. Right? Now, Abba Hanan, okay, we have another example, okay, where another sage is going to make the following suggestion. Amar Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, Katuv Echad Omer V'asa Lecha Aron. What about another example? We have one case where we have a pasuk that, in regarding to the fabrication of the Aron, it says Va'asita Lecha, that you shall do, and make it from wood. Ukatuv Echad Omer, and another pasuk, okay, that also says Va'asu Aron Atzei Shitim. In that case, we may have argued that when it says Va'asita Lecha, it means Moshe had to make, or that Bezalel had to make the Aron from his own means. In the other pasuk, that would seem to imply that it came from communal funds. HaKetzad, how then do we interpret that? Do we use that as a parallel to our explanation of Kach Lecha Va'asa Lecha? Kan Bizman Yisrael Osin Ritzono Shel Makom. On the one hand, he says the plural use in the pasuk says it's based on a time when the Jewish people are fulfilling the requirements and obligations of Hashem. Kan Bizman She'ein Osin Ritzono Shel Makom. And in another case where the pasuk does not reflect that the Jewish people are following the obligations and responsibilities to Hashem. Ad kan lo plige ela bekichot da'alma v'asiyot da'alma. Up to this point, they don't seem to be arguing, except in general, where the word kach is used, the word aseh, or make, is used. Kichot da'alma, when it says taking in general, kach lecha samim, as for example, take spices. Asiyot alma, when it says in general to make, aseh lecha shtei chatzotzrot, where it said, for example, to make the two horns. Kesef, take an example with chatzotzrot kesef, right? Aval hanach. But with these specific examples, okay, argues the Gemara, Perushe kamefarish the mishelcha. Here it's explicitly seems to be indicating that it must come from one's own. Okay, the mishelchahu. Now, the Gemara is going to tell us, hold on a second. We're going to base it now on a different model. This whole question of the sequestering. Okay? Let's base it on Bimlu'im, on the model of the inauguration of the Mishkan, and see if that would be a viable model that we have for sequestering the Kohen, okay, as well as our example that they sequestered the Kohen who did the Para Aduma. Bimlu'in, right? Regarding the inauguration, right? Beginning of the Mishkan. Michdei, Ktiv, since there we find it written as follows. Ve'el b'nei Yisrael tedaber lemor, kechu se'ir izim lechatat. And it says, right, that he was told to speak to Bnei Yisrael and to tell them they should be taking certain offerings, okay, for chatat. Vayomer el Aharon. It also says, and he spoke to Aaron, Kach lecha egel ben bakar lechatat. Another pasuk specifically directed at Aaron. So one is directed to Bnei Yisrael and uses the plural, kechu se'ir izim. The other directed only to Aaron, using the singular, kach lecha. Okay. Lamali, what's the reason for that example? Shema mina, kach lecha mishalchahu, biyom hak. Okay. So therefore we learn from this that seems to imply, again, that it had Aaron as the high priest had to take from his own. Okay. Now, B'Yom HaKippurim, on the Yom Kippur, Mechdei Ktiv Bezot, as regards to Yom Kippur, since it's written on this, Yavo Aharon El HaKodesh, Bapar Ben Bakar Lechatat Begomer. So here again, we see a reference to Aaron individually, okay? And then another pasuk shortly thereafter, where it says, Ume'et adat b'nei Yisrael, yikach shnei seirei izim b'chatat, v'hikriv et par hachatat asher lo. So there again, talking to Bnei Yisrael, saying, taking, okay, but again, and again, vehikriv, still in singular. Nevertheless, lamali, why is that the case? Shma mina, hi, lo, when it says his, mishelohu. This comes to tell us that it comes from his, right? So again, it seems to imply that we're trying to draw a parallel between the Miluim situation that Aaron had to bring his own and the Yom Kippur situation. If we can draw that, then maybe we can draw the sequester example as well. Now, Rav Ashi brings a comment. Amar danin par lechatat va'ayil le'olah mi par lechatat va'ayil le'olah. He says in the example of the Miluim, okay, we can draw a parallel between Yom Kippur and the Miluim based on the offerings that he had to bring a par, right, for a chatas, and the ram, the ox for the chatas, okay, and a ram for the olah. Here too, okay? That had to be the case at the Miluim. La'afuke Rosh Hashanah va'atzeret, and that comes to exclude Rosh Hashanah or Shmini Atzeret, right? The travaihu olot minhu. Why? Because on those occasions, when we have two required offerings, they are both olot, both totally burnt offerings, and not one olah and one chatat. Now, another comment, Ravina Amar, and he tells us, Danin avodah b'kohen gadol me avodah b'kohen gadol. That again, okay, we could draw a parallel between a worship act, let's call it that for the moment, only done by the Kohen Gadol, as Aaron had to do at the outset of the Miluim, to Yom Kippur, where the entire avoda, the entire worship procedure acts, is done by the Kohen Gadol. Okay. So there too, there's a possible parallel between Miluim and Yom Kippur. And what do we say that? La'afuke kulhu kushyatam delav avoda b'kohen gadol minhu. And that excludes all these other issues, all these other problems that we raised where the issue did not deal with any worship on the part of the Kohen Gadol, but instead it could have been performed by any Kohen. Now, Gemara wants to say we have an issue of language here. Ve'ika da'amri, Amar Ravina. And there are those that say that Ravina phrased his explanation in a different manner, by saying as follows: Danin avoda tchila me avoda tchila. That we can make the comparison and judge, right? And make that gzeira shava, we said, that parallel association between the initial acts of ritual worship, namely the establishment of the Mishkan, right? And its initial, let's call it undertaking of worship, to another initial undertaking of worship. La'afuke hani delav tchila ninhu. To exclude other examples where they are not initial acts of worship whatsoever. My tchila. So the case the Gemara asks then is, what do you mean an initial act of worship? Ilema tchila b'kohen gadol. If you're going to say it was the occasion when the Kohen Gadol first began to carry out his mission, his role. If that's the case, Hainu Kamaita, then that second Lashon of Ravina is no different than the first Lashon, the first version of Ravina's statement. Ela avoda tchila b'makom. But we're talking about ritual procedures done initially at a specific location and place. Me avoda tchila b'makom. That it was initially done in the Mishkan as a designated location. So likewise, the avoda of the Kohen Gadol is done in an specific initial place. That's the only time he goes into the Kodshei Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies. Now, Ki Ata Rav Dimi, and when Rav Dimi came, right, we know, he would commute from back and forth from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel and bring the learning from one location to another. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, in this case, he brought learning based on Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Matnei Chada, And he taught the following one thing. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, matne tarte. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, in regards to this issue, taught two items. What did they teach? Rabbi Yochanan matne chada. Rabbi Yochanan taught one, say, Mishnah, one statement in regards to that pasuk, regarding la'asot ulechaper, to do, to atone. Elu ma'aseh yom hakippurim. That is the, let's call it action, incident, the carrying out of the entire day's ritual procedures. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, matne tarte. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi taught it as two items, namely la'asot. One is regards to elu ma'aseh para, namely vis-a-vis the procedure for tahara with the para aduma, lechaper elu ma'aseh yom hakippurim, and for atonement in regards to the whole procedure for Yom Kippur. So the Gemara wants to clarify. You claiming Rabbi Yochanan matne chada. You're saying that Rabbi Yochanan only taught the two verbs, implying a single procedure, a single act. V'ha'anantnan. But here we teach as follows. Shivat yamim kodem yom hakippurim, v'shivat yamim kodem sreifat hapara. Okay? That's 7 days before Yom Kippur and 7 days before the burning of the para aduma. Those are two separate items, two separate examples of sequestering. Ma'aleh ba'alma. So the answer that he gives is, well, maybe Rabbi Yochanan simply saw it as a upgrading of the status of the para aduma by making it like Yom Kippur. Vaha amar Rabbi Manyome bar Chilkia amar Rabbi Machasya bar Idi amar Rabbi Yochanan. So we have other sages now citing the view of Rabbi Yochanan as follows. When the pasuk says, "Ka'asher asa bayom hazeh tziva Hashem la'asot l'chaper aleichem," based on that pasuk, la'asot elu ma'aseh para, to do, that is the occasion of carrying out the para aduma. L'chaper, to atone, elu ma'aseh yom hakippurim, that is the incident, the events of Yom Kippurim. Okay. Now, says the Gemara, hahu derabe. So that's multiple items. Okay. In other words, that shows that Rabbi Yochanan did perhaps teach it in two examples. Now, the Gemara further wants us to understand the chi'ata Ravin being another commuter, right? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Yishmael. He said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, la'asot, okay, that verb, elu ma'aseh para, that dealt with the whole episode, let's say, the carrying out of the para aduma. Lechaper, elu ma'aseh yom hakippurim. That again, so now we have further proof, okay, that Rabbi Yochanan held that they were two separate items, but had certain commonality. Amarle Reish Lakish, the Rabbi Yochanan. And given that situation, we see that there was a challenge at the time raised to Rabbi Yochanan by his Talmid Chaver Reish Lakish. Mehacha kayafatla. On what basis do you learn this? Mi'miluim, from the example of the inauguration, the start of the Mishkan. Ima miluim kol hakatuv bahen ma'akev bahen. If that's the case, Reish Lakish is arguing to Rabbi Yochanan. If you're learning it from the Miluim, then anything that's written about Miluim, okay, and it's not carried out appropriately, is going to be ma'akev, is going to, let's use the word for the moment, delimit, or to put the limitations, afhacha, then here too, nami kol katuv bahen ma'akev bahen. Then likewise that should apply to the avoda of Yom Kippurim. V'chi tema hachi, and if you say that's the case, nami also, v'hatanan, isn't it also taught elsewhere in another Mishnah? Umatkinin lo kohen acher. It says that they then, in our Mishnah, it said that they then prepared another kohen. Velo katani mafrishim, but it doesn't say that they sequestered. V'chitema, and if you want to say mai matkinin mafrishim, that if you want to say when our Mishnah said that they prepared, it really meant that they sequestered, right? Litne, so let them teach it that way. Oh, or ide ve'ide matkinin, or let the Mishnah say, both in regards to the Kohen Gadol and his potential substitute, that they prepared them. Oh, ide ve'ide mafrishim, or again for this one and this one,
You separated them.
that they sequestered them. Amarle. So Rabbi Yochanan's answer. Ela mar, but rather, he says, master. In other words, designating to Rabbi Reish Lakish, if you don't base your parallels on the Miluim, on what can you base your whole idea of sequestering, of, right? Amar misinai. Reish Lakish says, so I base it on the model of Har Sinai. Dichtiv, why? Because it's written there, Vayishkon kevod Hashem al Har Sinai, v'yachasehu ha'anan, sheishet yamim, vayikra el Moshe bayom hashvi'i, okay? That the divine presence rested on Har Sinai, and Moshe was called up 7 days later. Mechdei ktiv, since it's written, Vayikra el Moshe b'yom hashvi'i, okay, since it says, and then Moshe was called on the 7th day, Ma'i sheishet yamim, what's with those other 6 days? Ze bana'av, shekol hanichnas b'machaneh, shchina, te'un prishat shisha. This seems to imply that whoever enters the, I'm going to call it for the moment, the divine camp, the area where the divine presence is located, needs initially 6 days of separation, segregation. Okay? V'ha'anim shivatnan, but don't we teach 7? Would be Rabbi Yochanan's argument based on the Mishnah? Matnitin Rabbi Yehuda ben Baterahi. Reish Lakish's answer, but our Mishnah, it could be that it follows the view of Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera. Why? Dechaish letumat beito. Why? Because he's concerned about the possibility of ritual impurity due to family contact. Okay? So the Gemara is going to continue in a moment with a little bit more, which we're going to finish up shortly. Amar le Rabbi Yochanan, the Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan at this point responds to Reish Lakish. Bishlema ledidi. My view is acceptable, says Dialfina Mimiluim, where we learn it from Miluim, the inauguration of the Mishkan. Hainu Detanya, because here we have a Braita that teaches, Zev v'zeh mazina lav kol shiv'ah mikol chataot shahayu sham. Okay, that right, that the priest sprinkled throughout the 7 days on the sin offerings that were there. Okay, Dahavai nami haza'ah kimluim, because that is similar to the sprinkling that was done on the miluim. Ela l'didach, but according to your view, the alfit misinai, that you learn based on sprinkling done at Sinai, was there any sprinkling done then? Haza'ah b'Sinai mi havai, really? Was there any sprinkling done at Sinai? Amarle. Okay, but it says again, coming back in the argument, Ulata'amech minecha, are you so sure, says Reish Lakish back to Rabbi Yochanan, that according to your view, it's so to speak, smooth, it's not without any difficulty? Bimluim dam hachamayim. At the occasion of the inauguration, okay, the sprinkling was done with blood, but here it's done with water. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan can answer. Ha lo kasha. Here, okay, it's not problematic. The Tani Rabbi Chia nechnesu mayim tachat adam. That Rabbi Chia says that they took the water and used it in place of blood. Ela l'didach, but according to you, haza'ah b'Sinai mihu. Was there any kind of sprinkling at Sinai? Okay. Amarle ma'ala ba'alma. And therefore, okay, it was simply a higher status. It was agreed to be moving it to a higher requirement. And that's where we're going to stop there for today. Okay?
Thank you, Reb.
All right, so we'll pick up tomorrow, we said at